playfulness and curiosity.
This new superpower called persuasion.
They're the rules of the world, and then here's the rules for us.
What does rich mean?
Stories and wisdom.
Welcome to the Stories and Wisdom podcast. Today we are joined by Bria Starmer, founder and CEO of Lions and Tigers, trailblazing workforce solutions company that's unlocking inclusive opportunities for hundreds of professionals. Now, Bria, you launched Lions and Tigers after your own experience being laid off that you've openly shared on LinkedIn, and that's how I actually was very intrigued, but also loved the work that you're doing. So to start us off, for people who do not know Lions and Tigers, can you describe what the company does? What led you to create it?
Of course, yes. And thanks for making room for this story. And the amount of layoff stories I collect, it wasn't what I anticipated would be what I hear a lot about these days. But yes, I can empathize with that moment. As you mentioned, I was laid off 7 months pregnant, and I was really out of work, sort of waddling around town, interviewing for jobs, and faced a lot of pregnancy discrimination at that time. If you step back a little bit, my dad was an entrepreneur. He owned a tavern. My mom worked in corporate America. And so I always felt pulled between entrepreneurship and corporate. And so I started my career in corporate America and then moved closer and closer to startup life as I got older. And I got laid off from an IPO-bound startup in my 7th month of pregnancy. And so I decided to take a freelance marketing project just to fill the gap, just to pay my mortgage, honestly, as we didn't have any paid leave in Washington State at that time. And I was the breadwinner for my family. And so I took a little contract. Actually, I ended up taking 3 little contracts, working 60 hours a week to make enough money to self-fund a maternity leave. And what I realized at that time was that this work was perfect for me. It was perfect fit for where I was at the stage of life. I needed to fill a gap, but then I realized as I was deeper into some of these corporate contracts that they needed to fill gaps too, very strategic gaps. So we built Lions and Tigers to build a bridge, to build human-centric blended teams of employees and non-employees, taking advantage of the full power of the independent workforce, which now represents nearly 50% of American workers. So we stand really in their strength and help enable them to have access to work when I didn't back then.
So you're doing fractional work and you embrace fractional work, but also kind of remote work way before COVID and way before it became more normalized. But did you even use that language of fractional or gig before? I know we had contracts and stuff because that was an industry trend that I think you were very early on. How was that?
Yeah, we didn't have the word fractional then. Flex work has been around for a while. I've followed researchers and philosophers and teachers on the topic of flexibility for a long time. And in fact, when I was a full-time employee at Microsoft, I was in one of the first groups that they let go work from home back in the early 2000s. And so they said, let's go do a trial. And so I had some early cases of how to work remotely and how to build digital community within that. But yes, people have said that this is a really innovative idea. And for me, this is the most obvious business of all time. We are doing part-time fractional work for highly skilled people. We're just keeping them in the workforce. And so it's always felt really simple to me in that regard. But I know that it isn't for everybody. And so part of my job is explaining to them how normal blended teams are and how accessible this work is on both the independent worker side and on the enterprise side.
So with that, I'm going to actually take us into our first segment. I know we've been talking about memoir, but this is going to be memoir moments. And in Memoir Moments, we'll revisit an early story that probably shaped how you work, your leadership style, or you can take it in any way. Is there a personal experience that you'd like to share that first revealed to you that our traditional 9 to 5 is not working for many people?
Yes, I will tell you a very personal story. Okay, so I had just had this baby. I was freelance consulting 25 hours a week, marketing contract. And I was trying to get my baby to sleep. So these early days, you have no idea what you're doing. And so I set up a Facebook group for a couple of moms that I was friends with, just to say, like, are we binking? Are we swaddling? Like white noise? What are we doing here? And what happened next was really surprising to me. Within a couple of weeks, I had 500 mothers all on this group offering advice to me. And then they all were trying to solve each other's problems. And it was a really profound moment for me because I realized that I had never been in a community like that. In all of my life, I had never experienced an intrinsically motivated group of folks who were coming together to help each other for no other reason that they had access to knowledge that other people didn't. and that there was just a joy in sharing. And I thought to myself, why couldn't work be like this? And so it was a real aha moment for me. It also made me very motivated to make mothers some of the richest members of our society, which we know is not how our society is built today. But that really codified for me the idea of building communities that are of sharing by design, not competitive in nature, and that really try to help each other look around the corner. And so that was the business hypothesis I started with, which feels a little altruistic in the society that we have. But those were the early roots of us wanting to bring a little more humanity to the way that we work.
And this was in one time zone region, or was it national?
It was national. It was all across America. A bunch of moms jumped in really quickly, and it grew beyond that and way beyond even my curation. Like people took this in all different directions. We ended up bringing in speakers and things like that because this group was just so committed. It was like a flash mob. And I thought, like, what if we could work like this? What if we could take a really big business challenge, pull together a flash mob, and see if we could solve it in a way that didn't harm people in the process?
So you're talking about your community of people who are helping you when you were an early parent for your first kid. But I also remember a podcast that you were creating around the same time when we were figuring out these skill sets for, well, this whole parenting thing is not a skill set I have, but I have to be great at. And you still managed to have a podcast while you're in that community, which is way beyond than joining a community and getting insights from others, as you told there. So that was that giving back or creating that community or adding to that I thought was significantly unique compared to new parents coming and, leaning into a community that you did that I want you to share.
We've always been really open about parenting out loud, about what it takes to both be a caregiver and an entrepreneur at the same time. And I just hadn't seen that modeled. In fact, I was really motivated after my very favorite boss when I was at Microsoft left after she had her third baby, and left because her husband's career was doing really well and she wanted to go stay at home with her kids. But I felt a tremendous loss. I was like, losing her was so significant for me because I felt like we lost this wealth of knowledge. And even if I could have held on to her for 10 hours as a mentor, 10 hours a week, that would have been significant. And so this binary, this belief, some of the ways that we have been told that we need to be caregivers and work, like those things have been in opposition. And so I think we've always been curious about how do we investigate and interrogate those ideas and do it in public so that we can all contribute. Because certainly I don't have all the answers. I'm bumbling around here like the rest of us, trying to make sure that we make the next right decision. So I appreciate that you even remember some of those early days. I actually started this series on LinkedIn called Thoughts from the Pumping Room, and I would pump. I mean, you couldn't see, the camera was up, but I was like, this is billable time. I was a consultant. I was like, I need to turn this into something. And so I would just talk about, I don't know, labor force and unionization and whatever while I was just pumping milk. Because, for every one kid you have, a woman's going to spend 3 weeks of her first year pumping milk. So I thought, well, let's make this billable.
Totally. And the reason why it was in all this is like around the same time frame. And my kids are in third grade. And I know your first one's probably in that age group. Because with twins, then pumping was a big thing. And then for me, I was just looking at this is a supply chain thing. And there's so much work and it's way too much for her to do it that I was making a decision around okay, the startup that at that point I was running, we've closed it down because I'm like, here are 2 startups that I cannot fail at. I can always start another business startup. And then I closed that because we couldn't. And then the community for multiples, they force you into it. Whereas you were trying to look for it, they actually help us into the outcomes. Health outcomes tend to be low percentiles. So you need this community. Here's what you have to look for. And then they scare us before the kid's even born. And that's what I'm like, okay, if it's all of this, let me close my startup. And then when the kids were born healthy, and then we were like, okay, fine, now I can do my other startup. And while we were actually navigating all of that is when I saw those podcast episodes coming in from the pumping room. I'm like, we can barely breathe or do anything. And she's running a podcast. I got to see this. That was pretty much why I remember this so clearly. And I wanted you to share because there were 2 of us. We were playing zone defense instead of man-to-man coverage. And because there was 2 of us and 2 of them, and it was still you think one person can handle 2 because the other person can sleep at that time. but they don't cooperate. Like the one kid will sleep, the other one wants to poop or not burp, and suddenly it's a whole different.
Yes, this is why I like to work. There is more control in my workday than in my home life. I've never Googled how to be a CEO, but I've Googled so much stuff about these kids. They take a lot of learning and a lot of humility to even go into that job. So, and the fact that you're doing two at once is amazing.
Yeah, which is why I remember that I think at least one, if not two, where the whole thing was like, how is she doing this while, I mean, it's a marketing kind of a podcast, but how are you
It was a pumping room. Luckily, I had a pumping room. Like a lot of women don't even have pumping rooms. I just was so fortunate to even have a room. It wasn't that strategic either, Pradeep. I was just like kind of in it. I was just wallowing in it and wanted to bring people along. I did have the most reaction from men, surprisingly. I think I just thought that I would be connecting to a lot of other women that were in the same boat as me, but I had a lot of men say, I never even thought about the fact that you have to stop your day to go pump. So that was good. It's great. It was a little bit of a PSA. That wasn't really the design, but it was also good.
The next section that we'll actually get to, it's decision do-over. I want you to think about any choice that just looks different in hindsight for you. So is there any decision that you made or anything that you'd approach differently today?
You've highlighted sort of the connection potential that we've gotten from each other, even just being connected on LinkedIn or seeing each other exposing these questions out in public. And I think I went into entrepreneurship in such a raw and vulnerable place that it was a method of community building for me to be talking about some of this stuff in public. But in my corporate life, I was never as vulnerable. I was never as authentic. I was really operating from a place of fear. And I see that a lot now from my clients, from the people that are trying to stay in it, to stay they're present. And there's a very big difference in where the world is at versus where I was back then. And so if I think about do-overs, I'm not sure if I could have been as vulnerable in that job as I am here running my own shop. But I will tell you that to have market validation from your values being in public is the most healing work experience I've ever had. I wish that for other people. And so I know that not everyone can do it. And I hope that they could get themselves into a place where they feel closer to being able to be as vulnerable in public as I've been able to be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very great answer. We had another person, and I won't even reveal the company or the person, on the podcast. And then she was a guest answering a few questions. 2 days after we recorded, she actually emailed like, it was a great recording. I think I shared a lot of stuff that I don't think I'm ready to share within where I'm working at. And then I was like, so did you want to say something else? No, whatever I said, I meant it. And I felt so good sharing all of that, but I'm not sure I'd want to. And then when you're talking about this freer in the corporate world that you felt and you couldn't get out of, I sensed that was similar for her. So she wanted to do a re-recording. I just said, we won't publish it. And I understand that you're not ready, but the fact that you're authentic and you say, I hold by what I'm saying, but I don't think it's ready for publishing yet is what I'm holding on to. And we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, I think for anyone that's being told to be authentic, it is with an asterisk. And that's really challenging for folks, And so there are other methods. Not everyone needs to be pumping on camera on LinkedIn. That's maybe the farthest side of the continuum. But there are ways, of course, that you can demonstrate your values, purchase with intention. We have a bunch of clients, for example, who care about the purpose of lions and tigers. And so they buy from us over other suppliers because of the values that we bring, for example. So they're doing intentional supplier spending. So there's many ways that you could sort of exist within a system that isn't built for authenticity and still have values that are not exposing or dangerous to you in how you work. But I can really relate to that individual that you mentioned because it is a real challenge right now.
Yeah, I mean, the industry, at least as we are recording this is early fall 2025, the Northern Hemisphere. So fall is different than anywhere else in the world. And the job market does look bleak and has looked bleak for a bit. And then along with the geopolitical climate, which is different than last year or the last few years, to put it mildly, is making the job market, along with the technology advancements, in a very huge, uncertain space that people are questioning. Even they're does loyalty mean anything for wherever they have been? It's come up. Is that something that has come up with you? Because it's almost like you bring in a watershed of people with high values into your roles and have them explore fractional. So Where do you sit with loyalty and where they're at and how you're bringing that in?
I think loyalty is two-way, and that has shifted a ton. When I was growing up, my parents encouraged me to think about having a lifetime career, to work your way up. And when I started at Microsoft, that was my plan. I was going to go be a VP. I was VP bound all in. But I felt really pulled to the pace and innovation that you can find in entrepreneurship with sort of the break things and be nice to people along the way mindset. And so I think it's really changed. Even in the last year, I can see a tremendous shift in the appetite for independent work for people coming into this, not because of layoff or not because they were pushed into it like I was, but by design, by intention, wanting to come into this with full agency, 10 toes down, and thinking about this as a portfolio of experiences and skills. And maybe they're collecting logos along the way, but it's a very different kind of mindset than a pension mindset or in some of our highly regulated industries where you think about 30-year careers. So I'm really encouraged actually by the kind of disruption we're seeing right now, because I think it actually could be underneath the surface a talent-led design that we have an opportunity to harness right now.
Yeah, I think that is a very good watershed answer for us to move on to the next segment. So next segment is Vision Venture. So with Vision Venture, and then we already talked about a few patterns, trends, winds under our wings, so to speak. So where do you see you leveraging the current uncertainty or current opportunity that's coming in, or even the talent that is out there? How do you see this coming together for you and the industry that you're probably expanding into, like fractional and that space?
I mean, if you look at some of these big macro trends, they can feel pretty overwhelming. If you look at even just recently, I was reading today in the New York Times, another tremendous loss of women from our workforce. We see a depression on number of employees. Even in my area, I'm in the Seattle region. It's the first year that Amazon hasn't had more local employees than the year before. So we are seeing a difference in how people work. And at the same time, we see a surgence in entrepreneurship. We see people running into this space. And so we're seeing that is a little unique from other people. When you think about personal brand or setting yourself up as a consultant, the thing that we know really, really well is the power of how blended teams are built within enterprises, within corporations. And that's sort of a unveiling that we want to make sure that we're doing for the public, because we don't want people white knuckling this thing. We want people to be fully informed, really confident, going in and understanding how they fit into this bigger puzzle. That's a very dynamically changing workplace, and it's okay if it's seasonal. And so being able to sort of sit on both sides of that and bring those things together is really a privilege to make those matches. We call it operating in your highest and best use. So we build these teams where people can just slot into these pockets so that there are no gaps and that the whole operation is more efficient. So that's really the energy that we're pulling in as we head into this 2026 fiscal year, is to think about how those teams can be fortified. And we have some research coming out that making me even more confident to be able to step into that space, to be able to guide both conversations forward to the power of these blended teams and what they can unlock for businesses that are trying to move at the fastest pace we've ever seen in my lifetime.
So as you're bringing these people in, are there ways in which these individuals might be blending into multiple teams of multiple organizations during the same time frame? And given that context, I'm going to throw in this noun as a verb at you. How do they AI properly?
How do they AI properly? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is all about speed, automation, efficiency outcomes. Like that is how we are measuring performance right now, which is different. It's really different even from 3 years ago. And so anyone that comes in, we're always looking at their skills first, their experiences second, and their potential third. And I think that is a different way of looking at talent than what traditionally we've done in hiring and staffing or in enterprise buying. You think about like, where has this person worked before and would they be a culture fit here? That's the traditional idea. We're going to put them in a 9-to-5 job. Now we have these consultants or folks that have come out of a portfolio of careers, and then they have also developed their own IP. So they're essentially like do you remember shovel-ready projects like the Obama era? Like I think of them as a shovel-ready worker, like that's ready to jump in, and there is no leg. There is no onboarding. You don't have to do a recruiting cycle. You put them to work right away. And then with the benefit of some of this tool and technology, AI behind them, for example, I mean, they're building their own agents so that they're even faster. We have a whole change management practice that's being built right now to move at the fastest speed we've ever moved, from a set of consultants that will flash mob in and use that IP, and then we'll move on to the next. So you can really be very effective across a number of brands all at once.
I think the part that I was also getting down to, like when we are touching these AI tools, but then at the same time, the data is coming from multiple teams that you are working on, how do you compartmentalize and make sure that there's no bleed over? Because with AI, the bleed over can be even out of your own control because of how the technology is built in compared to here's a folder, I will have these documents. These other folders and these documents are not going to be affected, even though the learning is going to be through that individual. That's how we were doing consulting. But with AI tools, you have to, given the pace of what we're trying to do, we will be using it. And that's what I meant. How do we AI well or properly? When you're touching these multiple clients and you're using these tools, have you found the method where it is done better?
Let me just say to all of my procurement friends who buy our services that we are very secure. We follow, of course, there is a ton of scrutiny on how data is handled now in a way that the level of rigor for a firm like ours to be able to access and to come into some of these enterprises and get the privilege of seeing their data, we have to hold that with an incredibly high regard. So there's a lot of protocol on the back end on our staff side to make sure that that's done well. But that doesn't mean that learnings can't be shared and experiences can't be shared because we're seeing a lot of patterns that look the same across these enterprise organizations, especially with digital transformation projects, AI enablement projects. The challenges are generally the same. You can swap in different names and different products, but the themes are similar. And so we would take that sort of agnostic approach to how we come in with our practice work. And we bring together these consultants that would take the IP of how we work, not the data specifically to the clients that we've worked with.
That's the part that I wanted you to call out, because the patterns and practices that as an organization that you have, including compliance and then the data walls that are created, is not something that somebody else would just say that they have it, because it's a pattern and practice that an organization has. And to maintain that requires intent. And that is very important. And I know with your team that you guys do that. And I wanted to make sure that came up, because in AI, we kind of loosely just say that tool will give us. And when you use it in multiple, the walls don't exist. And it's very hard then to say that you're holding that bar.
Yeah, I also want to comment too, when I was a buyer on the corporate side and I wanted to have a big change motion, I would hire a big four consultancy because they had a team and a playbook that they would just deploy again and again and again. And what I would say now is that we are seeing an incredible difference in being able to pull together a bespoke team for that specific need that is enabling us to compete in ways that I never imagined my little company would be able to compete against these very large organizations that have the same method over and over again. The way of work with net new talent every time is actually a really big advantage for these organizations.
When you were actually starting that answer and talking about the big four, I remember at least in two different companies unrelated to each other that they had a playbook was like, this is service line 3 and service line 2. And then I'm going who speaks this kind of language? Till I realize, go to another company and they're speaking literally the same thing. What the service line 1 and 2 were different, but then the fact that a template is being used as a tactical language in the field when they're talking to customers just feels like that's not how I thought it was going to be used in terms of customization. There is more finesse that I think now we can bring in that was an opportunity from before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the largest change management initiative we've ever seen. That is what we are in right now, is change management. And if we don't understand the motivations and fears that people hold, we will never be able to honor getting them to where that we need them to be.
Which I think is perfect to get to our next segment, puzzle point. With all the tensions that we are seeing, it's socio-economic, there's geopolitical, and then there's also the workplace, but also there's, even if for the employees who have been out the market looking in, needing a job, but even the ones inside with a job currently, there's a higher level of fear than I have ever sensed before. And that's something that they have openly shared in very different forms, including Blind and everywhere else. How are you seeing, are there any questions that when you're grappling the future of work, because you kind of stumbled into a future of work, I think a better way to do it. How are you looking at this puzzle point or multiple dimensions? How are you bringing this together? And we've talked a little bit around that, but I wanted to just unwrap this puzzle in front of us as a talent pool, as the uncertainties, the technology coming in, and still, at least the way you're describing it, shiny opportunity for growth and wellness and personal growth, not just economic growth. So tie this all back together in terms of in our puzzle point section.
I think the biggest puzzle right now is access. And I will leave it there. That really is for me the thing that gets me up in the morning and keeps me up at night is how do we create more access for a lot of people who are not advantaged in the system. People always talk about mentorship and sponsorship and training and education. And, I love following people like Cindy Gallup and others who say, no, pay me. And so much of this is just about getting folks into the work that helps them live the lives that they need and want. And so I feel very evangelical about creating access to work that is hard to get to. And so that's the puzzle that I'm sitting with right now. These are policy decisions, they're procurement decisions, they're workforce decisions, they're business outcome decisions, and more they're social impact decisions. And so I feel like there's a lot of work to do and job security in that. So that's the puzzle that I'm always thinking about.
Are there any work with policy that you actually work with in the state in this kind of space that you lead the work on, or you're running a few experiments maybe?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we're doing some research into blended workforces today, and we've taken on our very first public sector project. So we're getting to test some of these theories across how our government works. And as a citizen and as a shareholder, I care about both. There are a lot of things that are a little scary still about the independent workforce. There are lack of worker protections, there are lack of even childcare or paid leave, which is already so hard to get to, doesn't benefit the independent workforce. So we see a lot of legislation moving in a way that is worrisome about this group and how they would be able to retire one day or access health benefits. So yes, I think we're dabbling in all of those topics around how we can add a voice on behalf of the independent workforce so that they are protected and that this feels like a destination that's safe to alleviate some of those fears that you talked about, Pradeep, is some of the things that are holding people back. Because I just personally have experienced thousands of times seeing what this does for people that enter into this with intention.
And I'm going to turn back to how we started, but in a very different way, right? We started with parenting and kids. So given how the workplace is changing, the way we are actually educating our kids, are they in alignment, or would they actually be in a better spot because the education is ahead of where the flexibility is needed in the workplace? What is your thought on it?
I had these old assumptions about who wants independent work. I had this when I started, I was biased. I thought specifically about mothers in my stage of life. But what you see from the data is actually many people, every generation wants this kind of flexibility and values alignment in how they work. Even my mom entered into consulting work at the end of her career to stay in it for a while in more of an advisory capacity. And so I think our kids, I think about them, often I have 3 kids under 10. And so I'm thinking about what do I invest in their college accounts? Does that make sense? I've got one kid that's for sure going to trade school. He's 6. I can tell you that already. So, we're mitigating some risk, but I'm also encouraged by how entrepreneurial they are and how easy it is to access this stuff. If I had ChatGPT when I was starting Lions and Tigers, how fast would I have been able to move in those early days? I barely graduated from a state school. So to be able to access some of this data and speed up the pace of entrepreneurship and to make it more accessible anywhere, especially to our kids in this rising generation, I think is actually what will accelerate the kind of change that we're looking for. So I feel very encouraged by that.
And let's have a game break. And this is the last section. It's called This or That, Bria edition. So I'm just going to give you 2 choices and we're going to follow up and we'll just go back to back. And if you feel like you have to clarify, you can, but you don't have to.
Okay.
So first, startup grit or corporate polish?
Both.
Okay. Why?
I think that there's a season for all of it, and go where your heart leads you, and you can do both, and it's okay.
Okay. Flexibility or stability?
Flex.
Build community or build scale?
Oh, Pradeep, I don't know. Do those have to be opposing? I think at first I was build community and now I'm build scale.
Okay. Founder energy or CEO focus?
Oh man, you're describing the evolution of my, this is so Bria edition. Lately I've been saying that we're very businessy business. So I guess I have to say CEO focus. My team will appreciate that.
Last one, work-life balance or work-life blend?
Oh, this one's hard for me because I think balance sets us all up. It just sets us all up to be failures from the jump. I've never been good at that. I think it is a series of choices back and forth, and you make the best choice you can. So I don't know if it's blend. I think that it's like you're just doing your best every day. I just got an email from my kid's teacher 5 minutes before this that said he wasn't turning in his homework. So, I don't know. Then you're just bouncing back and forth between looking at the world and the news and your inbox.
Bria, thank you for sharing your stories and wisdom today. For listeners who want to learn more, where can they find more about Lions and Tigers or join your communities?
We would love that. lionsandtigers.com is our website. We're super active on LinkedIn. And as I mentioned, we're releasing some new research that's pretty incredible. Our first time conducting primary research, and would love for any followers that are interested in this topic of blended teams and where work is shifting to follow along with us and add their voice.
Yeah, once again, thank you, Bria, for joining us. And your journey reminds us that the future of work is not really either or. It can be an and it can be something that is uncertain, but we just have to keep putting our step forward. And in your case specifically, is like you can bring a community that you didn't even think you had along and build it. And I think that is a valuable, inspirational idea, lesson for all of us. And thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, thank you for being on the podcast. We'll be back soon with more stories, questions, and wisdom.
Playfulness and curiosity.
This new superpower called
They're
persuasion.
the rules of the world, and then here's the rules for us.
Real deep pain.
That was a very different level of inequity.
What does rich mean?
Stories and wisdom, we rise.